Real Men of Real Estate with Steve Matley, construction manager and real estate developer, business owner, and educator.
Did you know that right now there's 22,000 units deficit?
Tunde Ogunwole, real estate development professional, Naval Academy grad, and veteran with a deep understanding of the public sector process.
All of us want to live in thriving communities.
Brian Fox, real estate expert and investor, dedicated to helping hundreds of clients make money in real estate every year.
There's so much housing going in.
The builders are begging for more land.
Future company can come in, lease up space to employ those people who are living in the homes.
We have to put the housing in place.
That either have to have houses,
They want to make sure that there's a strong employment.
logistics centers, things like information hubs. We are a shipping economy now. There's economies all over the country where their prices are doubling and tripling.
Hi, I'm Steve Matley, president of Coast Equities, and this is Real Men of Real Estate. And I'm joined today by Tunde Ogunwole. He is a commercial project manager, and by Brian Fox. He is with Fox Real Estate Group. He is a real estate broker out of Orange County, California. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be here again. It's good to be here.
All right, so we're still broadcasting out of home instead of the studios because California is starting to open up again, but not quite, and that's all right. But in this process, we've seen the stock market look like a roller coaster. We have seen unemployment skyrocket. We've seen businesses that have failed and some trying to reopen now. And of course, following on the heels of the COVID, there was the civil unrest coming up. But in the midst of all of this chaos, while everything seems to be going haywire, the real estate market is just steady. It hasn't dropped. It has, the people predicted all kinds of catastrophe with it. And yet the numbers show that through March and April, the real estate market stayed strong. Prices actually went up. Sales, they stagnated for a while because it was hard to get transactions done, but those are coming back quickly. New home sales actually stayed very steady. So I'm going to open this up so we can talk about this. Why has the real estate market been so stable and actually improved a little bit while everything else seems to be in a tailspin?
Well, for me personally, obviously I'm on the residential side more than the other avenues, but there has been a delayed amount of actual demand by a lot. I mean, actually, the Gen Y, Gen X folks who even 6 months ago I would talk about, they've been on the bench for so long that they're delayed coming to the market by all economists' forecasts of when people should enter into the housing market. A lot of them have been very delayed. They just put off the decision-making process. So these people, there's a high amount of income still out there. So a lot of people have been living at home, and those people are all still in the workforce and still looking to buy, and inventory has actually shrunk a bit. So in this process, even though it would assume that it makes sense for the market to go down because of everything going on economically, there's still a lot of people who never really entered in the marketplace, and they still have a demand there. So even if 20% of the market goes away in the form of buyers and unemployment, you still have a hefty amount of 80% people who delayed that decision-making process and are still there ready to make that decision with the lesser amount of inventory. So the lesser amount of inventory combined with the people who are still trying to enter into the housing market, it just off-balanced exactly what people would predict would happen and has kept the market keep going. At least that's what I see on the residential side.
Okay. What are you seeing, Tunde?
You know, to kind of build on what Brian talked about earlier, I think when we look at some of the demand statistics going into this, I call it the great pause, there was a healthy amount of demand, not only in residential, but you saw a healthy amount of demand for industrial projects, in particular the e-commerce space. Everybody's been working from home and they've had to readapt their home working environment to be able to accommodate kids in school and doing that from home. And they also changed their buying behavior because they couldn't go outside. So on the industrial e-commerce space, there's been an increased demand. There was already trending up over the last 10 years, about 3% annually, but now it's spiked because people have changed their buying behaviors. So when we talk about the logistics space, the demand was already strong and it's grown even more because people have readapted to the living arrangements. In addition to that, all of us are pretty familiar with the stimulus package, and it's just that, to stimulate the economies, to stimulate asset values. And so when you look at lending rates, for those of us who were in the market already or looking for opportunities. We got better loans that are out there. The interest rates are lower because the Federal Reserve's really trying to stimulate that activity. And I would also say that over the 10-year up cycle, one of the benefits is a lot of people did pretty well in the market. And if you did pretty well, you're not necessarily going to offer a deep discount early when you're in the middle of that great pause. So I think we're kind of in that little transitionary window where we're still fact finding on what's happening out in the market. People are holding pre-COVID, pre-great pause pricing. They've got a strong lending environment. And then there are those pockets where there's still strong demand.
And in addition to that, I think that's all true stuff. We went into this. This wasn't like the downturn we had in the early 2000s where it was real estate driven, it was lender driven, a lot of bad policies, people that were in hawk up to their eyeballs, credit cards maxed out everywhere, stated income loans. This isn't like that. We went into this with a historically strong economy. I don't know that it was the best ever, but it was certainly up there with one of the best economies we've had in recent history. And there was a pronounced shortage of homes available compared to the demand for homes, which was driving prices up. So I like your terminology, the pause, the great pause. I think that's exactly what we did. We had an artificial pause in the process. This was not an economic correction. Now, the stock market may have had a little bit of a correction as part of it. Obviously, most of it was driven by the fear and anxiety, and it's been behaving like an unruly 2-year-old, while the real estate market's been quite steady. As we come out of this, the resale side that Brian works in did take a hit early on because the issue of not being able to go into people's homes to look at them, to go in and do appraisals, to do home inspections. People don't want people in the homes, and we're not supposed to be out into the places. New homes stayed pretty steady, but a new home, you're walking through an empty shell. You're walking through an empty building, and you're not interfering with other people's lives where you're passing germs around. You're in an empty building, and it's being built for you. And that's a different world. And also all the issues of appraisals and paper signing and mortgages, all that's usually in-house with the builders. And so they can take care of most of that without having you to go to banks and go to the notary and go to different places to get things done. So that stayed pretty steady, but we're seeing the resale sector come back strong because now we can actually go in and do these things. And there is that pent-up demand. We didn't stop it. We put a temporary dam on a river, and it just backed everything up. And so now as we release it, that demand is coming forward.
And if I may, one more thing on the resale side is that in 2008, when we went through the Great Recession or the mortgage meltdown, what was impacted was mortgage and residential. That's where a lot of the stuff was going on. Whereas in this case, what's going on is attacking, quite honestly, if people aren't really recognizing it, it's actually attacking more like office space where people cannot go, they don't need to go, they're finding they can work from home. And so what that does is although you think, hey, the market's going to go down because of something that happened economically, true in theory, but it's going to be more focused on the area in which was majorly impacted, which in this case was where people can go and congregate at work in groups of 6 or more. And if they can work from home, that actually has caused an increase of demand for suburban housing in many areas because so my company can survive working from home. Well, then cut the whole office space, send them home. We don't want them here because if we can get that done, it costs us a lot less money. And therefore the office space should, by theory, take a negative. And maybe Tunde, you could speak on that, but residential would go up because of the greater demand. Go ahead.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. When we talk about the market, most people, when they ask that question, they're talking about the residential market. And the residential market, I think mostly single family residential up to 4 units. So let's call that our single family market. That's still doing fairly well in most areas, depending on the employer base that's in your community. So you obviously got to focus on your specific geography. But the point that you made, which I think is a really important one on office sector, that's changed significantly. What I think a lot of owners are doing is they're not trying to market what they're anticipating the valuations or the NOI or the cap rates are now, given that a lot of tenants are no longer having the same occupancy in their office buildings. The office building is due for some softness. There are corrections that are coming. We just don't have enough data in to see what the market looks like because we're still in that pause. We're opening a little bit, but there's still some restrictions. There are other sectors where there are significant distress. hotel hospitality. The occupancy rates dropped to single digits in many of those hotels. So if you're somebody who had worked in the hotel hospitality, we feel for you. We know that that's significantly impacted you and your business. We understand those assets also are undergoing some reevaluation, but people haven't fully marked to market what those valuations are, because there's still this hope that that stimulus activity, as people start opening up, that'll generate some more demand. So we haven't yet seen what the pricing looks like, but I would say that the clouds are the clouds are gathering in some of those product types. And again, that's based on the decreased demand. Not as many people are traveling as much, not as many people are going to office. And if they go back to their office, the density requirements aren't going to look like what they looked like before. So there's a lot of movement that's happening in different product types.
So an article came out on May 31st. I picked it up off LinkedIn. It's entitled, "After Flocking Downtown to Woo Millennials, Offices Moving Back to the Suburbs." So why? Well, because a lot of millennials are moving back to the suburbs. And this ties to a couple of other studies I saw. One was a survey done by ABC News in Los Angeles, where fully 1/3 of the renters in LA, and 60% of LA is a renter's market. So 1/3 of 60% of a 4 million population, that's a lot of people, were actively looking to move either to the suburbs or out of state to get homes instead of being renting in the city. That's number one. Number two, 27% of adults across the US polled were considering moving to homes out of the urban environment post-COVID, because they ended up being quarantined in small spaces in buildings where they had relied on common areas, which were no longer accessible. The gyms and the reading area and the workout room and those kind of things that were the first thing to get shut down, pool decks and all that stuff. So now you're stuck in your small space that was supposed to be mitigated by the park around the corner that's closed, by the hiking trails nearby that are closed, by the beach that's closed. And so that's a lot number of people. 27% of adults across the country, and 1/3 of the 60% of the population of LA wanting to move out and into the suburbs. And as you know, Tunde, already in Southern California, 75% of industrial construction is already in the Inland Empire, right, instead of on the coastal counties, which is where the big distribution centers are. And now we're looking at offices moving out that way too, because that's where the people are.
Yeah, and what you really highlighted too is the goal of every investor, the goal of anybody out there who's looking at how can I make some money, what's going on in the market, is to really figure out what are the catalysts for change. We talked about 2008 and the recession. It was more of a mortgage meltdown, and so the ripple effects is what we felt then. Now this catalyst is a public health concern for the most part. There's civil unrest, so that's
mostly in the urban centers again.
Many times in the urban centers. However, it's also in different communities. So
it has been. It has been, but usually around the urban centers, yeah.
So understanding what's happening on a local level, everybody talks about location. I don't always like using that, but it is important to find out what's happening in your micro market, your sub market, and what the drivers are there. And then the goal of every investor is to try to figure out, well, if there's a pivot, how can I benefit from that pivot? Do you switch asset types? Do you start thinking about, after the civil unrest subsides, the volume of money that was boosted into the economy, where is that going to go? Typically, asset values benefit for a period of time, and then things settle. Where do you move when things settle? So that's the goal, I think, of every investor when they're thinking about where the market is.
And I think there's also people have money to spend because some people lost jobs, that's true, but people that didn't have money to spend because there was nowhere to spend it. You can only spend so much online. You're not spending it going out because there's no place to go out to. You're not going to Disneyland, you're not going to the restaurants, you're not going to the clubs, you're not going to those things because you can't. And I think that will create again that surge in the economy as we get back to normal again, of people wanting to go make up for lost time.
You know, that's a great point. I think it's funny because here in Southern California, is we went through stage 2 of opening up. It was almost like opening day. It was exciting to see how many people were excited to get out of just being quarantined, getting outside, riding their bike, getting a dose of vitamin D, et cetera. And so there is that pent up demand to be able to do more activities. I will say that the savings rate, to your point, in terms of spending habits changing, not going to retail location, which has been impacted. shopping centers and local retail locations. If you're not a grocery store or you're not a pharmacy, they've been impacted significantly. That said, the savings rates, I think I read a study, and I'm blanking on the source, so I'll try to find it before the end of the show, that the American savings rate nationally for the month of April boosted to 13%. 13% versus negative savings rates. We're a nation of spenders.
Yet another opposite compared to the 2008 issue. Yes.
A very different dynamic that's undergoing. Having said all that, depending on where you are in terms of how much your savings is and what you're invested in and what your liquidity equation is, that's going to influence how you benefit and how you're harmed by what's ahead of you. But there are glimmers of hope. There's a lot of excitement around the fact that the market is still strong in many areas in residential. And so I think that's something that we'll continue to monitor.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. We have to keep in mind that when people work, the number one thing they're trying to work for is their house. Most people are trying to buy a house. And so in 2008, and there's been multiple crashes over time. When 9/11 happened, there was a market crash. It affected a lot of things. It affected the airline industry. American Airlines went bankrupt at the time, still around and may or may not go bankrupt again. But the reality was the crash really didn't take that long to recover from it, and it didn't have, in many cases, issues on real estate at all because it wasn't directly affecting real estate. People still wanted to buy. In 2008, many people were going through, let's call it withdrawal. I don't know what the right word is, but there was this thing that happened where they were all buying houses, and then everyone lost their home because of the banking industry, and the banking industry wasn't lending money. So this whole system came undone, and they couldn't do what their main objective in life is for most Americans, is to buy their home. And so now people have that ability, and they haven't removed the banking element. The banking element still exists. It's still there for you. And they still have FHA, 3.5% downs throughout most of the country. That's pretty affordable. And by that fact, it's still a goal you can have. And so if you have the normal savings rates, if you have the decreases in spending, if you have that dream still, and you're just stuck at home for a little bit while this coronavirus thing becomes more normalized, that's why people are getting to it again, because they have now understood how they prevent it or stay away from it. Now I'd like to get back to life the way I had it. And because nothing changed in that regard, it hasn't changed how they're trying to make their decisions moving forward. If something else happens, where there's a decrease in money, or if the banking system has issues where they can't lend, then we will see more of a shift inside of residential itself. But right now, the reason why, as we talked about being an office space, is because that simple market got changed by the demand changing. There's no demand for it. If we can send our people home, it'll change how we pursue this.
Well, we've got to wrap up this conversation, gentlemen. It's fascinating. And I think it's really key to look at how resilient and stable the real estate market's been. And I've read some things where people are saying, well, we think for the future stocks are a better option, or precious metals, and real estate may not. Real estate's been solid. It's really performed well throughout all this. And I think it's because we did not allow ourselves this time to get into a soup of bad lending practices and other irresponsible behavior going into this. And I think it's a good thing that we didn't allow that to happen. I mean, the whole society overall, because that's what kept it stable. And I think it's the one thing that's keeping it solid. And I believe, as was pointed out in a couple of the articles, that one came out from the NAHB this week, saying that they believed real estate, homes in particular, home sales, were poised to lead the recovery out of this downturn. So with that, we're going to have to sign off. To the people out there that are tuned in and taking your time, we thank you for spending time with us. Don't forget to check us on Roku, Building Solid Foundations channel. Like us, if you like this, make a comment, subscribe, click the bell if you want notifications, and we will be back with you soon with another conversation that hopefully you can have some information to do something with. Brian, Tunde, thank you so much for your time today and your insights, and we'll see you next time on Real Men of Real Estate.